First of all, my name is Arthur. I will be hosting and moderating the more economic-centered sessions, including this one. And we have three speakers. One quick reminder before this, we are recording some of the talks, but we are focusing on the speaker screen, so leaving the camera on should be totally okay. In this session, we will have a focus on platforms, but the session titles are somewhat loose. And the first speaker is Professor Matthijs Wildenbeest from Indiana University, whose work spans a great many industries from search engine optimization to electronic books, insurance, and electricity, and equally many methods. But it is often building on the idea of search for information, something that's gradually transformed from a slum dwelling in the town of economics 60 years ago to a very applied idea for modern day internet commerce of shopping bots and shopping platforms. Then we have Professor Henrik Nax, who is a behavioral game theorist at ETH Zurich and the University of Zurich. Henrik, being a behavioral game theorist, is able to both push forward our theoretical understanding of learning and matching dynamics in the markets, but also test this with human subjects in the laboratory with economic experiments. And that also produces several absolutely fantastic data sets and empirical results. And finally, we have Professor Justin Johnson from Cornell University, who has a long list of seminal contributions to business strategy, antitrust, and industrial organization, often with a focus on high-tech advertising, models of incentive for open source and online platforms, etc. One last thing I want to point out before we start is that Professor Johnson's paper discusses Q-learning, a particular reinforcement learning technique that is bound to come up super often in this workshop. At least one more time, it will come up tomorrow in Emilio Calvano's talk. And so if the audience is interested in that kind of topics, you might want to check out that session as well. All right, so with this, I'll give the floor to the first speaker. And thank you again for rejoining us or joining the first session.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so thanks for the invitation to present here. So this paper is joined with Babur de los Santos, who's at Clemson University and recently moved to Amazon, and Dan O'Brien, who's at Compass Lexicon and Micro Foundations. Okay, so let's jump right in. So in most retail markets, firms typically use what is known as the wholesale model to sell goods. So we're all familiar with how this works. So there's an upstream firm who sells a good to a retailer at a wholesale price, followed by a retailer selling the good to a consumer at a price set by the retailer. However, in online markets, so-called agency agreements are becoming more popular. So examples include Amazon Marketplace, eBay Buy It Now, and the various app stores. And an important difference between the wholesale and the agency model is that the retail price is set by the upstream firm instead of the retailer. And another big difference is that there is revenue sharing. So the retailer gets a fixed percentage of the price for every item sold. Because of revenue sharing and the different price setting arrangements, we think agency agreements raise interesting questions for both price theory and policy. And the key question I will focus on today is how does the choice of price institution affect prices and profits? So to study this key question, I'm going to focus on the market for ebooks, which is a market in which agency contracts are currently being used. And what is nice about this market is that during the past 10 years, it has been moving back and forth between using agency and wholesale, which has generated useful variation for studying the price effects of the different pricing mechanisms. So a major reason for this variation was a 2012 antitrust case that alleged that Apple and the major book publishers had engineered a shift to agency in combination with most favored nation clauses, MFN clauses, to raise prices for ebooks. So the MFN clauses in this context are price parity restrictions that required the price of an ebook title to be the same everywhere. So the same ebook title needed to have the same price at every retailer. So a relevant question in this market is whether this price increase was caused by the shift to agency, the MFN agreements, or perhaps a combination of the two. So there's a recent theoretical literature in economics that has begun to address this question, and I have some papers listed here. And most of these papers find that the equilibrium price tends to be lower under agency than under wholesale. In fact, Justin has shown that this holds for the bilateral monopoly case, as well as for imperfect competition, for a wide variety of demand functions in his 2017 research paper. So I have a simple numerical example for the bilateral monopoly case to illustrate this further. So suppose we have a constant elasticity demand curve with demand being equal to 10 divided by the square price. So let's further assume that input prices are determined through take it or leave it offers by the entity that is not setting the retail price. So the upstream firm sets the wholesale price in the wholesale model, and the retailer sets the agency royalty in the agency model. So in addition, assume that both the upstream firm and the retailer face a marginal cost of $1. Then in the wholesale model, the upstream firm will find it optimal to set a wholesale price equal to $3. Next, now let's think about the retail price. So the retailer takes this wholesale price as given, as well its own marginal cost of $1 and charges its own markup, which in this case results in a retail price of $8. In the agency model, the retailer acts first, so it would set a royalty taking into account how this would affect the retail price set by the upstream firm. And in this example, the optimal royalty will be 2/3. Then the upstream firm will take this royalty as given and will set a retail price of $6. So this example illustrates that the agency price is lower than the wholesale price, which, as shown by Johnson 2017, is the case for a wide class of demand functions. So one thing that is missing from the existing agency literature is that it does not allow for bargaining. So, and this is in stark contrast to the literature on the wholesale model, in which bargaining is considered a fundamental economic factor for determining input prices. So, and it's easy to see that shifting the bargaining power in the wholesale model will have big consequences for the retail prices. So let's go back to the example, and now a third column where we go back to the wholesale model, but now we assume that the retailer sets the terms of the input contract. So we're shifting the bargaining power from the upstream firm to the downstream firm. Well, it's clear what's going to happen now. The retailer would want to eliminate double marginalization, and it will do so by setting the wholesale price equal to the upstream marginal cost, which results in an upstream in a wholesale price of $1, a wholesale input price of $1. Next, the retailer will also set the retail price, taking the wholesale price as given, which now results in a much lower retail price of $4. And now, of course, although this is kind of an extreme example in terms of shifting the bargaining power, the point here is that the comparison between wholesale and agency is sensitive to the distribution of bargaining power. So what exactly do we do in our paper? So our paper has both a theoretical and an empirical part. In the theoretical part, we develop a simple vertical model for both agency and wholesale, as in Johnson 2017. However, in the model, we do allow the upstream firm and downstream firm to bargain over input cost. And we show that for a wide variety of demand functions, that whether prices are lower or higher on the agency depends on the relative bargaining weights. For the rest of this talk, I will focus mostly on the empirical contribution. So we first use a large data set of ebook prices to estimate the price effects of moving from wholesale to agency. And next, we provide a method to structurally estimate a bargaining model that allows for both agency and wholesale. And we estimate the parameters of the model and use the estimates for counterfactuals. But before we go into the empirical analysis, let me provide some additional background information on the ebook market. So before 2010, ebooks were sold using the wholesale model, pretty much like printed books, with Amazon selling ebooks at relatively low prices. In 2010, Apple was working on its iPad, and it teamed up with 5 of the largest publishers to develop the agency model. So Apple realized that if Amazon would stick to the wholesale model, it would be difficult to gain market share. So to deal with this, Apple requested an M-event clause, the most favored nation clause already mentioned. So this meant that if non-agency retailers would sell a title at a lower price, the publisher would have to match the lower retail price while still preserving Apple's royalty, which at the time was 30%. So Amazon and the others made the switch in April 2010 because of pressure from the publishers to indeed make the switch, which led to price increases. 2 years later, the Department of Justice in the US sued Apple and the 5 publishers, and a similar lawsuit happened in Europe, alleging that they conspired to fix the price of ebooks. So most publishers involved settled relatively quickly and agreed not to use agency contracts for a period of 2 years and no MFN clauses for a period of 5 years. So the judge recognized that the MFN clauses played an important role in kind of making sure that the whole industry would shift to agency. So by the end of 2014, agency contracts could be used again. The 2-year ban had expired, which led to a period of intense bargaining between publishers and retailers. But despite these intense negotiations, eventually all the big publishers switched back to agency, and that's where we currently at. So most of the industry has kind of switched back to agency contracts. And the second switch again had pretty big implications for prices. So this is a screenshot of a popular book in 2015, around April 2015. And this is a few days before the switch from wholesale to agency. You can see that the price is $3.99. 2 weeks later, the price had increased by $3 to $6.99, right? And Amazon started to prominently mention that this price was set by the publisher to indicate that this is an agency price. So our paper is gonna focus on the second switch to agency, which happened in early 2015 mostly. And to show the impact on prices of this shift, we use a large data set of ebook prices for new and former New York Times bestseller books sold at both Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So the publishers switched at different times, and we're going to use this variation in the timing of the switch in a different diff setup with the goal to estimate price changes when moving to agency. So in this table, you can see our main results for this diff and diff analysis. So the overall effect is roughly 14% at Amazon. So prices went 40% up following the switch at Amazon, while they went down by roughly 2% at Barnes & Noble. So we also interacted the agency indicator with publisher dummies, as you can see in this table. And the estimates indicate there's substantial variation across the publishers. For instance, at Amazon, we find that the price change at Penguin Random House was roughly 30%, while they're in general much lower for all the other publishers. Barnes & Noble shows mixed results as well, with the effect being positive at Penguin Random House, but 0 or negative for most of the other publishers. So the mixed results we got from the diff and diff are difficult to explain using take it or leave it contracts, since prices are expected to go down when switching to agency. So instead, to explain what is going on, we're going to develop and estimate a bargaining model for both agency and wholesale. So the demand side of the model is just a standard logit aggregate demand model, while input costs are determined using assuming Nash bargaining between publishers and retailers. And as I will show in a second, in the model, it depends on the bargaining weights, whether prices will go up or down after the switch, which provides a useful mechanism for identification of the bargaining parameters of the model. So it's important to see that because of retail competition, payoffs will depend on the outcome of the bilateral negotiations of other parties. And this is a problem that has been extensively studied in the theoretical literature. Horn and Walensky is a key paper here, the Rand paper. And following this, as well as the recent empirical literature, we use a Nash-in-Nash solution. We use the Nash-in-Nash solution to model the bargaining. So the idea is that when bargaining, the upstream and downstream firms act as if all the other negotiations are taking place at the same time, simultaneously. So this means that we're essentially looking for a Nash equilibrium in Nash bargaining. So in this framework, the objective of each publisher-retailer combination is to set input prices such that they maximize the asymmetric bilateral Nash product, which you can see in the middle of this slide. So here, lambda is the bargaining weight, which is 1 if the upstream firm has all the bargaining power, and 0 if the retailer has all the bargaining power. There's also a disagreement payoff here. So for those, we assume that if there's no agreement, then all the books of the publisher will not be carried by the retailer. Of course, consumers may shift to other titles, which we do take into account when calculating the disagreement payoffs. And the Nash-in-Nash bargaining solution is then the factor of input costs for all products, such that kappa, the factor of input cost, either the royalty or the wholesale input price, maximizes the Nash product for all combinations of publishers and retailers. So this graph kind of shows the main identification mechanism. So it shows equilibrium retail prices as a function of the bargaining weights. So let's start with the wholesale model, and let's start on the right, which is the take it or leave it case for the wholesale model. So in that case, the upstream firm will find it optimal to set a relatively high wholesale input price, which means that the retailer will set a high retail price as well. But if we start shifting bargaining power to the retailer, so if we start moving to the left, then the optimal input wholesale price will be lower and the retailer will find it optimal to set a lower retail price as well. So retail prices in general are increasing in the bargaining weight of the upstream firm, as you can see by the green line. So the blue line gives the agency case. Now let's start from the left. So when the retailer has all the bargaining power, which corresponds to the take it or leave it case for the agency model. So in that case, the retailer will demand a relatively high agency royalty. So the upstream firm will find it optimal to set a relatively high price as well, have relatively high retail price. However, if we start moving to the right, then the agency royalty will start to go down and the optimal retail price set by the upstream firm will start to go down. So there's a decreasing relationship between the retail price and the bargaining weight of the upstream firm. Now, if you combine the two lines, you can see that it really depends on the upstream firm bargaining power, the lambda, whether if we move from the green line to the blue line, whether we move from wholesale to agency, whether prices will go up or down. So for relatively low values of the bargaining weight, you can see that if we move from wholesale to agency, retail prices are expected to go down, while the opposite happens if the upstream firm has a lot of bargaining weight. Okay, let me say a few things about the estimation. So the objective is to obtain estimates of the demand and supply parameters, which includes the relative bargaining weights of the retailer and the publishers. So to deal with price homogeneity, we follow the approach suggested in McKay and Miller in their 2019 working paper, which is to jointly estimate demand and supply and to use covariance restrictions between unobserved demand and cost shocks. So intuitively, the supply side model imposes restrictions on how prices respond to demand shock. And if we restrict how the demand and supply unobservables move together through these covariance restrictions, then as they show, it is possible to obtain causal estimates of the endogenous price parameter. And the nice thing about this is that you don't need any supply side instruments. So that approach is particularly useful in this market because in electronic markets like this, it's difficult to use kind of the traditional price instruments, such as the BLP instruments, which are based on the characteristics of competing products, or Hausman instruments, which are based on price in other markets. So these are difficult to apply in a market like this. So let me go through the estimates. So let's start with the demand parameter estimates. Specification A gives the estimates for our main specification of the bargaining model. So in addition to book, store, and week fixed effects, we include the 5-star rating on Amazon and the months since release. And as you can see, the estimates suggest a price elasticity of minus 1.8. So the estimated price parameter is minus 1.8, which corresponds to the demand elasticity. Specification B gives the estimates when assuming take it or leave it contracts. So our bargaining model assumes that the bargaining weights are the same in both periods, whereas this model assumes they're 1 in the wholesale model, right? That corresponds to the take it or leave it case in the wholesale model, and 0 in the agency model, right? That's the take it or leave it case in the agency model. So as you can see, the bargaining from the objective function value, the bargaining model outperforms the take it or leave it model in terms of fit. However, the models are non-nested, but we can strongly reject the take it or leave it model against the bargaining model according to a Rivers and Fung non-nested test we did. So this table gives the estimated bargaining weights and agency royalties for the bargaining model. So the average estimate of the bargaining weights is 0.3, which suggests that the retailers have most of the bargaining power. Remember, the lower this bargaining weight, the lower this lambda, the more bargaining weight the retailers have. However, there's substantial variation across the different publishers and retailers. And in general, Amazon has more bargaining power as measured by a lower lambda than Barnes & Noble. So the agency royalties are on average about 39%. Which is a bit higher than the rate that was used in the first agency period, which we know was roughly 30%. So the agency royalties are on average higher at Amazon than Barnes & Noble, which can be explained by the higher bargaining power for Amazon we found, so the lower lambda for Amazon, as well as its better bargaining position due to its size. So this is what you would expect given our estimate of the bargaining weights. Then last couple of minutes, so we use the estimates to run a counterfactual to see the impact of MFN, most favored nation clauses, on prices. So remember that MFN clauses were banned for a period of 5 years, and this was done in an attempt to reset the industry. So the judge recognized that MFN clauses played an important role to make sure that the whole industry would shift to agency during the first agency period in 2010, 2012. During the second period, I mean, the period we're in right now, everyone has already switched, of course, but still MFN might have interesting implications, because with MFN, a retailer who wants to raise royalties knows that the price will remain the same relative to other stores. So this kind of gives an additional incentive to aim for higher royalties for the retailers, which will increase retail prices, at least from a theoretical point of view. So these are the results for the counterfactual. So the first half of the table is what we get according to our current estimates, right? So no MFN. The second half of the table is what happens if we do have MFN clauses according to our simulations. And as you can see, indeed, the simulated equilibrium prices and agency royalties both go up when there's MFN clauses are again being used, right? So prices go up on average by roughly 7%, and the royalties go up. So the agency royalties go up as well. And as you can see, mostly for Amazon or Barnes & Noble. So it's only going up slightly for Amazon, about 2.5 percentage points, while for Barnes & Noble, it's over 10%. And furthermore, the overall profits are going down, the combined profits of the whole industry, as you can see right here. However, I mean, there's only for Barnes & Noble, the profits are.
Matthijs, you muted yourself. You're muted.
How did that happen? Sorry about that. I didn't know what happened, but so let me kind of repeat the stuff about profits. So we find that the combined profits go down when moving to MFN agreements, as you can see from these numbers. So all the parties involved actually see lower profits except for Barnes & Noble. So Barnes & Noble is the only one who benefits from moving to MFN agreements. So, and given that the combined profits are going down, this kind of suggests that it's based on these numbers, it's actually not very likely that MFN agreements will make a comeback. Okay, so to summarize, we find that ebook prices went up sharply at Amazon after moving to agency in the period 2014-2015, but they remained relatively flat at Barnes & Noble. So these findings are difficult to explain using a take it or leave it model, so assuming take it or leave it contracts. But as we showed, can be explained by variation in the bargaining power across the retailers and the publishers. So we develop and estimate a structural bargaining model and estimate the model using covariance restrictions. So according to our structural estimates, the bargaining model outperforms a take it or leave it model in terms of fit. And the counterfactual simulations indicate that prices increase on average by about 7% when MFN clauses are allowed to be used again. However, based on the effect on profits, this suggests that there's no strong incentive for most of the parties involved to actually push for MFN clauses in the agency contracts. Okay. That's it.